Hi, happy Wednesday. It is so good to see you. I hope wherever you are in the world that your week is starting off strong because, man, are we going to have a strong cup of caffeine today because we have a power packed session together. Just wanted to say hello. I'll go first. I'm coming in from Austin, Texas. I'm Kim. If you're joining us live, say hi in the chat. We got Jim coming in from the Garden State. We got San Diego in the house. We got a little bit of everything. If you are listening later on your favorite podcast network, we got a lot of love for you too. But just know if you ever decide to join us live, you can head over to getcoffeewithkim.com and you can ask our guests questions as well. That way, I'm not just the only one pulling up a seat and asking all the good questions. So never fear if you miss our live, if you have to run out to a meeting, if all of a sudden somebody rings the doorbell or the dog starts barking or an email comes up, not to worry. You can always replay this session on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Facebook, and of course, your favorite podcast network. So just know whatever you need, we got you. Big hi to James and Britta and Shelby and Jim. Man, we got a lot of people packed in the house today, and that is no surprise because today's guest is someone who is really just a wealth of knowledge, and they are a wealth of knowledge on a subject area that I know for me is extremely intimidating, and it might be for you as well. And that is all things negotiation. It is when you are going in with someone, with a team, and you know that you want to get your way and they want to get their way. And how exactly do you meet in the middle? How do you end up with the best case scenario? So Kwame Christian is an expert at this, and he runs the American Negotiation Institute. He has an amazing podcast, which we'll hear more about. And he is a LinkedIn Learning author talking all about the subject of not only negotiation, but really anything that has to do with hard conversations. So giving feedback, overcoming silence. So really approaching those hard conversations, because a lot of times, sometimes you just think, well, I'll just be quiet. That will solve the problem, but that will not solve the problem. You have to unlearn the silence. You have to go into negotiations ready to take on the world. So please, Jennifer and Britta and Jeff, will you please raise your cup of caffeine wherever you are and help me welcome Kwame.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kim.
How's it going?
Things are great. It has been a while since I've been on this stream, so it's nice to be back.
It is so good to have you back. And I will say, while I have made micro movements in my negotiation, it is still something that gets me a little sweaty. So I'm excited for you to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to be back. And don't feel bad because everybody still struggles with it. And there are times where I'm going into a tough conversation and I'm getting nervous and everything. And I'm like, wait, shouldn't I be the negotiation guy? Shouldn't I be over this by now? But it happens to everybody. It's just part of the process.
Okay, I'm so excited to dive in. And one of the things that I have been thinking about the past week, I was talking to a friend and she was going into a really hard conversation with someone that she had, I don't know this person, but she had labeled them a gaslighter. And it really got me thinking, when you are approaching these kind of hard conversations or negotiations, do you approach them differently based on like, well, this person's a narcissist, or this person's a gaslighter, or this person's my boss? Or do you just think like, use the tools, use the tips, use the tactics, and it doesn't matter, sort of like personality agnostic, if you will?
It's a little bit of both. Because we have
Okay.
to understand the track record of past performance, and we'll pick up on patterns. And so there'll be certain patterns that people display throughout the relationship. You need to take note of that and create personalized strategies as you go through. But then as we get into the conversation, more or less the fundamental skills that are required will be the same, but it just depends on how you apply those skills. So for example, one of the courses that I have on LinkedIn Learning is leading and motivating people with different personalities. And so when you understand that somebody is more on the introverted side of the spectrum versus somebody who is more on the extroverted side of the spectrum, it'll change the way you interact. So for example, somebody who's more introverted, you might ask a question then you might need to give them a lot of space to respond, embrace that silence because they're thinking. But when somebody who is more extroverted, they might be more assertive, and it might seem as though they're dominating with you during the process, but that's just their personality type. And it helps understand how and when to allocate energy and not to take things personally too.
I love this idea of really trying to kind of study who it is that you're, I don't want to say going up against, because that's such like, I feel like it's such bad connotation, but really who you're getting in a discussion with. Maybe that's a better way of framing it. But what if it's somebody like a work situation where you just don't know the person that well, or it's a boss, or maybe it's a potential new boss. Maybe you're like negotiating, a new salary for a new position. What would you say in cases where you don't actually know if the person is introverted versus extroverted, or you just don't know them that well?
First, I would do research. So go to their
Yeah.
LinkedIn profile, any public social media profiles. Don't become that creepy stalker person. I'm not advocating for that. So it needs to be published. What are some articles that they've written, some articles that they share? You start to get some information there. Start to chat with people who have interacted with them. What do they say? What are some things I should watch out for? What are some things that they like? Those type of things. And then see if you can have some low stakes interactions with them. So it's going to be a tough situation for anybody to have a really high level conversation with high stakes on the line if this is the first time you're ever talking to the person. So if you can find an opportunity to just have a conversation, build a little bit of rapport, even if it's just a 5-minute get to know you type of session, that could do wonders for you when it comes into the actual conversation.
Yeah, I love this idea of kind of really trying to study the person as best you can. When you're approaching, these kind of more, I guess, high stakes or anxiety inducing conversation, is there any sort of formula that you use where you're like, okay, first I'm going to try to find out everything that they want out of the deal, and next I'm going to compare that to everything that I want out of the deal? Like, what's your structure kind of going into these conversations? Do you have like an outline or a template that you use?
Well, depends on the situation. Some conversations are a bit more structured, so it's good to
Yeah.
have an agenda and flow into it that way. But something that I use is a tool that I created called compassionate curiosity. You can think of it as a mental model that allows you to flow really organically through the conversation. So if you recognize that there is an emotional challenge on the other side, you stop and you acknowledge and validate the emotions. Then after you lower the emotional temperature of the room, then you get curious with compassion, asking open-ended questions with a compassionate tone. And then lastly, you engage in joint problem solving. So at this point, we've lowered the emotional temperature, we've gathered information, and now we go back and forth to try to resolve the conflict. So it's a 3-part framework that allows you to know what to say and when to say it for maximum impact. So you can flow without needing to say, all right, this is the technique I need to use now, or this obscure technique I need to use now. No, it allows you to connect with the person, resolve emotional conflicts, learn, and then work together.
I love this idea of really having compassionate curiosity, but what if you already know about yourself? Like, you could be curious, but you could also just be kind of quiet. I feel like sometimes the curious people are like the extroverted people, or the people that are like, I have a question, I have a question. Like, they're just kind of more, I don't know if the term is like bubbly or gregarious. Like, they're more engaged in meetings or negotiations or hard conversations. What if you know that your personality type is a little more reserved, a little more introverted, a little more quiet? How can you approach that compassionate curiosity when you know that it might not be your your first instinct?
Oh, I love this. So let's investigate this, Kim, because
Yeah.
when you look at things like the media, there are all these depictions of negotiators as really outgoing, really talkative, quick talking people. The majority of high level negotiators that I know personally are more on the introverted side. And for me, when I
Ah.
negotiate, I try to keep the breakdown of conversation 70-30, where they're speaking 70% of the time. I'm only speaking 30%. Because if I'm doing that,
Mm.
I'm learning more information. The person feels better because they don't feel as though I'm controlling them, even though I'm steering the conversation in a productive direction through this conversation. So think about this. This conversation right now is a great example, Kim, because I'm doing the majority of the talking, but I'm following your lead. You're the one asking the questions. And so when you're
It's a
negotiating,
dance.
Exactly. It's a dance. And once you start to recognize this flow, now you can be more authentic. Now I don't need to feel like
Mhm.
I need to negotiate like somebody else. I can understand and respect my own personality and create a strategy that works for me. You can still use this tactic, but you use it in a way that is authentic to your negotiation style.
Ooh, okay. I love this point from Jeff. So let's keep using our dance initiative. Or analogy. So you're in this dance, you're doing the foxtrot or the tango or whatever it is, the salsa. But you feel like there's an imbalance. Like the other person is leading the dance more than you are, or they're kind of being a little more bossy in the dance. How can you make sure that you're kind of getting a fair deal, that it's more of a 50-50 dance split?
You're gonna hate this answer, um,
You
because you can't, right?
can't.
You have to play your position. So in
Yeah.
these situations, you have to recognize, all right, I'm in this situation. This is where I currently am. What is the best approach for me? And it might feel imbalanced because it truly is imbalanced. They might have both
Right.
power and leverage over you. You might need the deal more than them, and they might know that. And so in that
Yeah.
situation, unfortunately, you're going to have to be playing from behind, but you don't want to overplay your cards. And so you have to do the best you can in that circumstance. Now, within the confines of the conversation, now this is where it gets really interesting. Because if you feel like there's an imbalance in terms of who's steering the conversation, there are some rhetorical techniques that we can utilize. Usually, if you feel like they are controlling the conversation and it's not going in a direction that you like, usually that's happening very quickly. It feels like this conversation is getting away from you. What you want to do is you want to slow down the conversation to a more manageable pace and then take control with asking questions. So, for instance, if I'm feeling like I'm losing control, it might be because the person is almost cross examining me. Question, question, question,
Mm.
response, response, response. And I am just being dragged behind this person in the conversation. So instead, what I would do is I'd slow down the pace, I'd take some time. And one of my favorite things to do is I'll take some notes. I'll say, oh, just give me 1 second. You gave me something to think about. Let me take some notes. And so I slow down. So no,
Mm.
nothing's
Yeah.
happening. Now I'm regaining control of the pace of the conversation. And then the next time they ask a question, or when I come back from writing those notes down, I'm going to come back with an open-ended question. And if they ask me a question, I'm going to respond, but I'm not going to end my response in a period. I'm going to end it in a question mark. So I'll give a short
Mm.
response and say, that actually made me think of this. In your opinion, what if we were to approach it this way? And so now what I've done very subtly is I've given them the respect of listening and responding to their question, but now I'm ending with a question and they're listening and responding to me, and then I'll have a follow-up question, and now I'm more in control of the dialogue.
I love this idea of stopping to take notes. That's so good. Because, yeah, it can feel like sometimes it reminds me. So, I used to play volleyball competitively in middle school and high school and stuff. And our coach used to tell us when the other team was, getting 1 point after another. And, there's a mojo when you're watching sports. Like the one team is in flow and the other team's kind of like, they're not doing as well. And my coach used to always say, tie your shoe.
Yes.
You'd always like stop the game and you'd be like, oh, I gotta tie my shoe up. Sorry, ref, we gotta stop. And he would, which is probably not good to teach. Maybe it is good to teach kids. Maybe he was teaching us early negotiation skills. But yeah, we would always like stop and tie our shoes. So maybe stopping and taking notes is like the adult version of the shoe tie. Now that I'm thinking
Yes.
about it.
It's powerful because you think about
Yeah.
the momentum that occurs in sports. It's something that we can see and feel, but we don't fully understand. We're like, hey, this is going bad for this team. I don't know why, but they're falling apart. And the other team is
Falling
rolling,
apart.
And so sometimes what do you do in sports? You call a timeout. And in the negotiation, taking your notes is a timeout. Another thing that I like to do is utilize the empathy loop. So it's a good tool to utilize when you're just showing respect and listening, but I also do it to slow down time as well. So it's a 3-part listening framework. So first, you listen. Second, you say, hey, correct me where I'm wrong, or tell me if this is a fair synopsis, but blank. And then you summarize what it is that they say. And then you give them the opportunity to correct you. Was I close on that? Did I get that right? Whatever works for you, put your own terms there. And so that allows you to slow down the process. They confirm that you got it right, or they correct you. And now the pace has changed. and you're starting to get things back on a pace that works for you. But it's a really, really smooth way to slow down time while actually making the other side feel more respected. And now we can move forward in the conversation with a greater level of mutual understanding.
So you had mentioned something similar to this in your building skills to become a powerful negotiator, powerhouse or powerful negotiator, one of the two, the LinkedIn learning course that I watched. But one of the things that I've started using that actually has worked super well for me is I will actually start using the phrase, I'm assuming. So like a client will say something like, Kim, we need to get this done by April 1st. I don't know, this is an example. And I'll say, okay, I hear you. You're saying April 1st. I'm assuming because the event is starting on April 3rd. And then they can use that opportunity to either say yes, and in which case my assumptions are right, or they'll say, no, actually the event isn't until the 5th, but I have a quality inspection check on the 3rd. And then I'll say like, oh, well, you don't need all the units there on the 3rd. If it's just like a quality check, you only need like one unit. And they'll say, oh, so like I'll learn things because everyone's kind of assuming their own like background. And so even just using the words I'm assuming and then I fill in the blanks has been really big. So you're right. Like that repeating back or even just using those phrases is so helpful. Do you find that that's something that a lot of people struggle with, just the phrasing of things in a negotiation?
First of all, before I answer your question, listeners, this is why I love chatting with Kim. I'm learning something. So I'm going to start using that I'm assuming move. That's gold. That is gold. So wanted to make sure I said that. And yes, I think a lot of times people, they focus on the right words in terms of the precise words that you utilize, and that holds them back. It holds them back from even having the conversation because they say to themselves, I don't know how to explain this. I don't know how to say this. And a lot of times what's really happening is it's the fear of the response of the other side. And so what we are doing is we're saying, I need to find the exact right way of saying this, because if I find the exact right way of saying this, then the other side won't feel as bad. They won't take it as poorly. Two things. Number one, we're not in control or responsible for the emotions of others. The only thing that we're in charge of is our own performance and doing the best we can. That's the first thing. Second thing is, a lot of times when you are delivering bad news or sharing something that the other person is not going to like, there's nothing you can do to sugarcoat this. They're still going to feel bad. So we're just delaying the inevitable. So what you need to do is you have to remember, clear is kind. I am going to state these things, and then I'm going to flow using compassionate curiosity during the conversation. That's it. And I think what's really exciting to me and liberating, and at the same time humbling, is that there's no perfect way to negotiate. And on the podcast, a few times we've had sparring sessions where it's like a practice negotiation where me and the guest, we don't prep at all, and I just try to be like ridiculous and we go back and forth, and we don't edit that part because I want people to see that expert negotiators don't always articulate everything perfectly, and they don't need to in order to negotiate effectively.
I love this idea of just really catching people off guard or really going at it in a free-flowing way, because it flows into Liz's question, which is, for someone who says to themselves, okay, I listened to Kwame's podcast. I, have all the notes. I've taken all of his LinkedIn learning courses. Like, I feel like I'm really good. But then in the moment, in the heat of the moment, it's, whether you want to call it a brain fart or a brain blank, it's like everything I learned goes out the windows. So I'm sure you've worked with clients or had, colleagues that face this. Is there, I don't know, some sort of like one go-to tip that you use for situations like this?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Liz, to your point, here's the thing. There is one cause of this happening. When you forget what you want to say and you don't articulate it perfectly, this is really technical. The reason why this happens is because you're a human. And as long as you continue to exist as a human, this will continue to occur.
This will happen.
That's the biggest problem. So now, if you are unable to change that about yourself, let's talk about some workable solutions. I'll bring in a quote from Bruce Lee. He said, "I do not fear the man who knows 1,000 kicks. I fear the man who has practiced one kick 1,000 times." And that's why I'm so focused on compassionate curiosity, because it's not a question of whether or not it works. It's a question of whether or not, or how it works rather, in this circumstance. So for me, when I'm trying to get my kids in bed and keep them in bed, I use compassionate curiosity. The thing that allows me to continue to be married for 14 years is compassionate curiosity. As a lawyer, I was using it. As a mediator, I was using it. As a CEO negotiating business deals, I'm using it. And so it just allows you to flow. And what's really fascinating about this is that a lot of times we overthink the difficulty. It's usually an issue of not even getting to a point of stability within the conversation and the interaction where we can actually have a high level conversation. But if you can first manage the emotions in the room so we can make better decisions and think clearly, and then you can get curious with compassion in order to build trust, show empathy, build respect, and gather information, then when we get to the third step of joint problem solving, we're just trading proposals and working together. It's win-win negotiation to figure out what works. Now, if we need something more than that, we can layer on higher level negotiation skills and techniques, and we certainly have those. But what I've found is that in regular life and in the business world, you just need that. And it's just a small subset of other conversations that need a little bit more. But we don't even get to the point of having a good conversation because we don't trust each other, we don't have enough information, and emotions get in the way.
Oh, I mean, the emotions are, I feel like 80% of the 80% of the problem. At least I can speak for myself, only because you feel yourself. You feel yourself starting to sweat, you feel yourself starting to tense up, you feel yourself starting to get like reactive or combative. And so sometimes I even feel like self-management is in those conversations is sometimes the hardest part. But I like this part that you just said about the joint problem solving. Do you think it's worth it in those hard conversations or in a negotiation to flat out say to the other person, like, I'm excited to solve this problem together with you? Like, do you try to get the other person kind of on your side of the fence, so to speak? So it's you guys versus the problem or versus the obstacle?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just helping people to recognize that there is no fence either, too, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. So in our minds, we think that we have pure intentions. Most people don't wake up and
Yeah.
say, you know what, I'm excited to be evil today. Not the case,
Yeah.
right? And so we have our story that we were coming to this negotiation with. But we also have to recognize that the other person on the other side also has a story. And in their story, we might be the villain. They don't know what's in our head, but we assume that they do. And one of the best things that we can do in these difficult conversations is simply state our intentions. Simply state the
Yeah.
intentions. Who are you? Who am I? What are we here to do? And just constantly saying, hey, I'm working with you on this. I'm excited to work with you. I trust your judgment. Those type of things. Just saying those things that you think are too obvious to be said, those things can help make things move forward. Let me give an example. So when I was when Whitney and I were dating before we got married on graduation day. And we were, I remember one of the things that she would get frustrated about was the fact that I wasn't saying I love you enough. And I said, don't hold this against me. I'm a different man now, Kim. But what I would say is, I was like, listen, I think about it kind of like the economy. If I flood the market with saying this, then the value of it goes down. So I got to ration this. So stupid, right? And so is it ever going to be a situation where Whitney gets tired of hearing that? No, she needs to hear this. And in our difficult conversations, we have to state our intentions because it's not always obvious to the other side. And so really taking the time to explicitly say, hey, this is the problem. It's not me versus you. It's you and me versus the problem. And together now in this conversation, we have an opportunity to work through this. That changes the whole tenor of the conversation. So saying that early and often throughout the conversation is one of the easiest things you can do to make the conversation easier.
First of all, I don't judge you, because similarly, when my husband and I started dating, he would take me out, like, whatever, every fourth date or something like that. We'd go to like a nicer restaurant and he'd be like, don't get used to I can't be taking me here every time because, then, you'll expect this on a Tuesday. And I was always like, what? But yeah, he has since evolved. But listen, we're all evolving. I think from a rational dude perspective, economy, that makes sense. Rationing, you want people to understand what the return on investment is going to look like. So, not the craziest thing. As Jeff said, supply and demand,
That's it.
if there's too much supply, the demand goes down, it's economics. It's economics.
Exactly.
I'm glad that Jennifer's like, it's a good reframe during these negotiations. But I would also say, it's a reframe even in conversations. Even if you're not necessarily going into a negotiation, or you wouldn't put it as a negotiation, it's something that I do all the time with clients, with, people that we're working with. I'm always like, how are we going to solve this? A lot of like we language, even though if I know like this is kind of their mess up, like it should be, how are you going to solve this? Because sounds like a you problem, it's not a me problem. I will use that we language because it does sort of help you also feel like, okay, we're locking arms, so to speak, and we're, kind of like going in it together a little bit more, I guess.
Absolutely.
Somewhat.
And two, think about this. I think for me, when I think about negotiation, I like to broaden the definition. So I think about a negotiation as anytime we're having a conversation and somebody in the conversation wants something. So it could be you and your significant other, and your significant other wants attention. They want validation, right? Or maybe it's me who wants that validation. So a lot of times it is. And so if I think about negotiation broadly, not in terms of like a transactional type of interaction, but just two humans sharing space, having conversations with needs, then I start to recognize I have opportunities to utilize my negotiation skills in situations that would not traditionally be considered to be a negotiation. And so I can have these conversations where I am talking about collaboration, using the we type of language, asking probing questions, and recognizing when somebody cares about something. It might not even be a negative emotion. Like we think about this all often through the lens of negative emotions. I want to acknowledge the positive emotions. Like just a simple example here, Kim, it looks like you really have done a great job with this show, and it seems like it means a lot to you to be able to do this, right? That's an emotion. I acknowledge it. Feel nice so you feel seen, right? And so you can still use the exact same framework in a really organic way, and it makes the conversation so much better.
Yeah, no, I definitely think bringing kind of that labeling in is really beneficial, and just naming those feelings and recognizing them. I think you're right, is such a game changer. One of the things that I really wanted to cover for this session was, I feel like anytime, and we obviously, when we announce this, we get a ton of messages, and I get like DMs on Instagram all about this stuff. But I feel like when you just even use the word negotiation, and then when you use the word work, even just putting those two things together, negotiation, work, the first thing that naturally comes up is salary. That's just like everybody's go-to, like, oh, they're probably talking about money, negotiating salary, negotiating bonuses, negotiating payment. And I love the fact that you created an entire LinkedIn learning course literally called Busting the Myths of Salary Negotiation. So I would highly encourage, this is my shameless plug, but I would highly encourage anybody who's joining us today to go check out that course. But I love to give everybody like a little taste, a little appetizer. So in your decade plus career, you've obviously worked with thousands and thousands and spoken to thousands and thousands of people when it comes to salary negotiations. So what is one of the biggest myths that you want to bust today?
Ooh, that is good. I think it would be reconceptualizing the perspective of failure in a salary negotiation. The only true failure
Mm,
is the salary negotiation that you do not have. Because you have to be willing to advocate for yourself. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Insert many other
yeah.
truisms here. So you have to be willing to take that shot. And now let's say, well, Kwame, if I ask for a salary increase and I don't get it, that's a failure. How can we reconceptualize this? Because here's the thing. If we are not getting what we want in this moment, that doesn't mean that we stop there. Negotiation is a problem-solving tool. So how can I still solve other problems? So maybe they don't have the money right now, but maybe I can negotiate for the next salary increase in about 3 months. So I would listen,
Mhm.
and I would here's an example of using compassionate curiosity. So it sounds like you aren't opposed to me getting a salary increase. It seems as though the problem is timing. Am I sensing that correctly? Yeah, you are. Okay. Well, hypothetically, then, when would I be eligible for this? Well, maybe in about 3 months. Well, great. Because if I didn't take that shot, then I don't have that information. I don't know when the right time to negotiate is. Now, here's another scenario.
Yeah.
Let's say we do the same thing. They say no and they're mean about it. And I know objectively I've hit these metrics. So I should be getting an advancement. Other people who are similarly situated are getting it. There's no clear reason for me not getting it. And I didn't like the way that they treated me through this. Then I have to take a time to negotiate with myself to recognize what is it that I want out of my career, not just this job in particular, my career as a
Mhm.
whole. And what I might find out is that this isn't the right opportunity for me. I thought it was, but now that I had this conversation and there's no prospect for growth in a reasonable time frame, now I know that I didn't have the information I need to make a better decision, which might take me to another company. And so if you are really adept and fluid in the way that you negotiate salary, then you don't run into a true failure scenario. It's just constantly finding ways through the art of negotiation to keep on advancing the ball, keep on advancing your career, and eventually you'll get to the right spot.
Oh, I love this idea of negotiating internally, like sort of like looking, like turning it on yourself. I mean, when you kind of coached people in this space, is it fear? Like what's the one thing holding people back when it comes to like that internal, I guess that internal focus?
I think it's the fact that they don't know how to negotiate with themselves. And so I've
Yeah.
created a methodology for it. And the reason why compassionate curiosity took so long to create was because I wanted it to do multiple things while still at the same time being simple. So
Yeah.
the exact same framework can be utilized internally for internal negotiations, for managing your emotions, making better decisions, and problem solving in the moment. So before the
Mm.
negotiation, let's say you're stressed out, you're afraid, and things like that, you'll acknowledge and validate your own emotions. So I'm going to label my emotions. What am I feeling? Fear. Okay, what else? We have to dig deeper because usually it's multiple
Yeah.
emotions. Fear, and then also disappointment, and then also frustration. Okay, great. Anything else? No. And I'm having this by myself. This is metacognition. And then I say, okay, getting curious with self directed compassion. Why do I feel these things? Well, I'm afraid that I might lose the opportunity. I'm afraid I might annoy the other person and damage the relationship. I'm frustrated that I even have to do this because I feel a little bit disrespected that I have to be the one prompting this and they're not coming to me with this opportunity. Okay, anything else? No, I'm good. Right. So I'm calming down as I go through this process. Then joint problem solving internally is reconciling the differences between your heart and mind. What would satisfy you emotionally in this moment, and then what would actually solve the problem at hand? Figure that thing out. Now you go into the negotiation more clearly. So you can have this conversation beforehand, take some time, minutes, hours, days, go through it and get that internal clarity. But then during the conversation itself, when you're slowing things down and you start to feel triggered, again, going back to those notes, a lot of times when I'm taking notes, I'm just turning that into a little meditation, going through this process, taking 10 to 15 seconds and coming back to the conversation with clarity and a good question that can steer the conversation in a positive way. So a lot of times the worst outcome you can have in a negotiation is a successful negotiation with the exact outcome that you wanted if you did not take the time to negotiate with yourself. Because if I accept a higher level position with a higher status and more money, and I'm a family man, and it is taking me further away from my family, then that might have actually been the worst deal possible for me. And so you have to go internally and have a little bit of that internal dialogue to figure out what you really want and why. Then you have that clarity and you can negotiate effectively.
Oof. I love that. And I feel like it's the type of thing that you should probably kind of hit the refresh button. Like, don't just do it once and be like, set it and forget it. It's like a crock pot. You kind of have to like revisit this, whether it's every 6 months or every quarter, because you change, internally changes, family dynamics change, financial, areas change. So I love this idea of repeating it as well. How often do you kind of, obviously you have a family as well, but like how do you look at that? Do you do it like once a year?
It's tough. I mean, we should be doing this as frequently as possible. And
Yeah.
journaling and reflection is something that I'm trying to do more frequently. So I used to do it like once a year. I would take tons of notes, and I would at the end of every year, I would listen to all of the notes that I took during the course of the year. And I probably
Mm.
average in my journal, because I dictate my notes, is probably about between 50,000 and 100,000 words per month of just journal entries and reflections, and then going over it. And so then I started to challenge myself and said, okay, well, I'm seeing like major leaps every year because of this reflection. Why don't I try to do it every month? Can I reset every month?
Mm,
And I recognize
yeah.
that when you kind of push yourself to challenge yourself in this type of way, reflect on every decision that you made, what went well, what went wrong, how were you thinking about it emotionally, then you can start to make these changes and hyper evolve with this process. And I recognize, Kim, that sometimes the we can make bad decisions because we're feeling pressure from the outside world, and it's hard to see where you begin and society ends and vice versa. And so you might be doing things because society is saying this is what you should be doing, what somebody like you should be doing. But it becomes even more confusing when the person you are trying to please is a previous version of yourself. So it becomes really confusing. It's like, okay, so I really love going on the road, being a keynote speaker and doing these. I like it. I really love it. I never thought it would be possible to get to a point where it was too much. But when you're on the road, like weekly, and you have two little kids and a wife at home who's having to handle that causes problems that I did not foresee. And so I have to be honest with myself and recognize that, hey, Kwame 2 years ago was dreaming about this, but Kwame in the present can feel and appreciate things that Kwame in the past did not. And so now with this new data, it's okay. I can make this change. It's not a concession. I'm not losing. I'm adjusting based on information. So as I would say, try to do this as quickly and frequently as possible, because you'll be surprised how much you can change in a short period of time.
Oh my God. No, 1,000%. And I would even like take it one step further. One thing that I've constantly started to do is not only recognize myself and where I'm at in that internal negotiation, but really become a stickler and negotiate like who is around me, both digitally and in real life. So I will do like quarterly cleanouts of like podcasts and newsletters and just anything that I feel like, let's take a look at this again. And is this serving me? Is this something I'm still using, et cetera? Or even just, because I'll go on LinkedIn Learning and I'll like heart save, whatever you call it. Like I'll heart a bunch of things that I want to watch, and I'll revisit that. Because to your point, 6 months ago, I might be like, oh, I really want to do this new thing. But then 6 months later, I'm like, oh, is that really a road that I want to go down? So I love this idea of also just like editing where you're putting your energy as well, because I think that that's super important as well. I'm curious, obviously you've been doing the podcast for a while now. What are some podcasts or newsletters that you yourself subscribe to, or that you or yourself get excited about reading?
Yeah, great question. I'll give a shout out to my team. This is not self-promotional. I'm promoting my team. So we have a newsletter, a LinkedIn newsletter based on the podcast. So we highlight our top
Yeah.
episodes and write an article on that. We have about 77,000 folks on that newsletter. So it's been growing. So I'll shout that one out. But one of the things that I've been really, really digging recently is just learning more about artificial intelligence. I feel like when we look back over humanity, it is the technology that ends all technologies, really. When you think about the wheel, internet, flight, this is one of those things, because it's going to be the first technology that can invent future technologies. And so I've been really enjoying looking at the work of Dave Shapiro. He has a presence that's pretty big on YouTube now. He's been on the podcast talking about the future of AI for negotiators as well. And
Yeah.
it's been really fascinating digging into that and learning more every week.
Oof, I know. The AI stuff, in some ways, I get really fascinated and I like go down a rabbit hole, like learning as much as I can. And then in other ways, I'm just like, I need to learn to garden, and like doomsday is coming and the aliens will take over. And who's going to learn how to grow carrots? Me. I will be valuable on the homestead. So, I waver between wanting to learn as much as possible and being like, what is going to be my doomsday skill? I've picked gardening. Someone else is going to have to learn self-defense. Everybody's going to have their doomsday job.
Yes, I think watching Walking Dead could be really helpful, because I used to think about that. I'm like, man, what's my value? I mean, nobody needs a
Yes.
lawyer out here.
Exactly.
doing?
No, you're not going to be able to negotiate with the robots.
Yeah.
So they're not going to have compassion and curiosity. That will not be programmed into their metadata. I wish it was, but it's not.
It can be
Oh,
scary, but I think it's very for me, I'm motivated equal parts by fear and curiosity. I'm like, wait, this is really cool, terrifying, but really, really cool. So I don't know how it's
really.
going to end up, but I'm enjoying the journey, and that's what I've started to do, Kim, when it comes to like staying informed in general, just in the world and with tech and everything. I start pretending like I'm watching a Netflix show called The World 2024.
Right.
Who are my favorite characters? Like,
The
oh, this isn't
world.
really happening. So I can
Totally. Yes, 1,000%. I love that. Okay. So as you know, around these parts, we love us some homework. We're a little nerdy. So I'm curious if you could give all of us a homework assignment for this week and over the weekend. It could be to watch something, it could be to try something, it could be to do something, download something. What would you have us do? What would your homework assignment for us be?
After we talked, we spoke a little bit about the tech apocalypse that may or may not be coming. Let's give people something light. So
Yeah.
I want you to find a reality TV show, the less
Okay.
substantive the better, and watch these people interact with each other. This is what I love to do. It annoys Whitney, but I'm still here, okay? So it can't be that bad. So what I love to do is we watch the like Netflix shows. We were watching Love is Blind recently,
Love
and
is
I love to
Blind.
see,
I haven't watched it. People are obsessed with the
are you,
show.
Kim, if you want to instantly feel really good about your life, watch
Watch
this
this show.
show. It is great. And so what I like to do is I love to see conversations break down. And I love to see like what body language cues are they missing? This person's talking about this person's talking about this, and they are not connecting at all. I can see what the problem is. They're having two different conversations, just happening to be close to each other in physical proximity, but they are on different planets and they don't even know. And it's really cool to see that, because then when you're having conversations in the real world, then you can say, oh, I see that their affect changed in that moment when I said that thing. Let me pause. Let me address that before going down,
Yeah.
because it might mean something, And so it helps you to get a little bit sharper when it comes to adapting and flowing during the conversations, because you can see tons of examples of conversations that went wrong, and it helps you to figure out how to make sure that yours stay right.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you see those Nat Geo shows and it'll have like the two jaguars and it'll be like one of them is approaching and the other one has no idea what's going on. And
Yes.
you're watching it with people.
Exactly. It's so funny. It's like, oh, this guy, he doesn't know, but things are about to get really bad for him in 3, 2. Oh, there it is.
You're like, boom. Okay. Well, mine's going to be Love is Blind, but everybody else can pick whatever other reality TV show that they want. So I like that. That's a good homework assignment for us.
Awesome. Enjoy and tag me when you have your feedback on what you see.
Exactly. I love it. Okay. So obviously, Kwame, you're in a lot of different places, but where do you show up the most? Where can people keep learning from you, keep following you, keep getting all of your goodness?
Well, if you listen to podcasts, Negotiate Anything, we have over 1,000 episodes, and we post every single day. LinkedIn, constantly posting. I make posts, and I try my best, and usually they turn out okay. And so we try to make posts every day on that, and then check out the newsletter. But if you're here on LinkedIn, check me out on LinkedIn. I'm very active here. If you're listening on Kim's podcast, clearly you're somebody who likes podcasts, so check out Negotiate Anything.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking time with us today. I really appreciate it. This was so fun. And like I said, you are doing a lot. You are busy. You are putting out so much goodness on the podcast, on LinkedIn Learning, on LinkedIn platforms. So just on behalf of everyone, thank you, because we love learning from you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, and thank you, everybody, for pulling up a seat and joining Kwame and I. This was super fun. If you're new here, so happy you stopped by. We hang out every single Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, same time, same place. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great weekend, everybody.